Hey everybody, welcome to episode 3 of Mental Health in the Time of Coronavirus. I'm your host, Dr. David Carreon, and we are going to get started talking about exercise and neuroplasticity. This week we've got some exciting stuff. So we are going to be talking about one of my favorite creatures in the universe, Sam. This is my dog. Sam is one of the cutest animals you'll ever see, as you can see from this glamour shot. And we're going to talk about what he has to do with your mental health, besides just looking at a cute photo. Also, you're going to learn about a giveaway. We've got a giveaway that we're offering for people participating in our surveys, as well as sharing in social media. More about that later in the episode. But with that, we're going to sort of get into the introduction. For those who are just joining us, my name is Dr. David Carreon. I am the medical director at Acacia Mental Health. I'm also the chief medical officer at Flourish Tech and a faculty member at Stanford. We're going to be talking about the outline in a little bit. The audience, make sure that we're talking about some pretty heavy stuff. So if this is triggering or upsetting or something that you want to avoid or want your kids to avoid, please consider a different program. Chat, be nice to each other. There's a live chat going on right now, so be chatty, connect with each other, but don't be rude. We have moderators helping out with that. Our sponsors are Flourish Tech and Acacia Mental Health. So what are we going to be talking about today? I'm going to talk for a little bit, then we're going to do a survey in the middle. This is a little bit different than past weeks, so what I want you to do in the middle of this, after I'm done talking, is fill out the midstream survey. The link is going to be there. I'm going to give it to you again later. Also throughout, if you have questions, you can submit them below. Below on the link description, there is the question link. So be sure to, if you have any anonymous questions, ask it there. Also feel free to ask in the chat. Also, we're going to have an end of stream feedback survey. So that's going to be another thing. Once this is all over, fill out that. And then we're going to have results of the midstream survey, and we're going to show you what answers you picked out. And then I'm going to talk about next week. So without further ado, here is the content. So we are at 1.7 million people infected with the coronavirus or COVID-19. We've topped 100,000 people who've died from this condition since the beginning. And I'm going to talk to you about the consequences, the psychological consequences of this. Now, we're talking last week about a few things. First off, we're talking about how you can treat yourself well, self-care. And so we want to make sure that you treat yourself at least as well as you treat your houseplant. That is your body. We want to help you take care of yourself at least as well as you would take care of an animal or a pet. That's your brain, and we want you to take care of yourself in ways that are special to being human, with what I'll call your soul. Okay, and just for review, this is from 2 weeks ago. For nutrition, make sure that you get a nice and healthy amount of light and food, and make sure it's healthy food. And then last week we talked a little bit about the importance of social connection, and we talked a little bit about the importance of sleep. So this week we're going to talk about movement, action, or exercise. So life hacks so far are: don't eat crap, go outside every now and then, let the literal poison drain from your brain by sleeping, and spend time with people. All right. We also talked about some philosophical themes about the Blitz spirit, the people of London being able to press on in the midst of a terrible bombing. And then also the importance of solitude in the midst of isolation, and how this paradox might be an important part of this time. Okay, this week, why do I have a adorable picture of my dog? Well, the answer is because he teaches us an important lesson. Now, my dog loves to go for walks. When he's not going for walks, he's sad. Now, we walk this dog a lot. Between my wife and I, we take him for lots of walks. We play with him. We do all manner of things, but he just cannot get enough. He loves walks. And here is him on a walk. You can see his tongue hanging out. He is having the time of his life because he just loves to walk. Now, if you want to make a dog happy, take him for a walk. If you want to make a human happy, it turns out it's exactly the same thing. Take him for a walk. A little bit of exercise goes a really long way, and walking is a spectacular type of exercise. So if you remember nothing else from today, just remember Sam, remember this adorable picture of my adorable dog, and go for walks. All right, so here's the actual evidence in humans. So it turns out that even in people who've had a past history of depression, when you exercise, and even just a little bit exercise, this is like a categorical thing. Are you completely sedentary or you do any exercise? People who do exercise have a substantially fewer number of days of bad mental health, even in the context of a previous depression diagnosis. But also, in addition to that, all of these different activities you see on the right, running, walking, going to the gym, they're all pretty similar in terms of the reduction in mental health burden. The big difference is between exercise and not exercise. And that's encouraging. And there's some, like popular sports or cycling, which I suspect to be a different effect and not actually better for you. But there does seem to be that more or less, whatever kind of exercise you do is going to be good for your mental health. And so even if you're locked down, can't go to the gym, whatever you like to do can't be done, even walking goes a long way. Okay, now what does it do to the brain? Now, one thing that it does is, if you look at this slide here, this is a picture of functional connectivity. How much of the brain is connected to the part of your brain that is, in this case, squeezing a hand gripper. And so in the course of the study, it makes sense that the part of your brain that's in control of the hand would be correlated with the hand grip. But the thing that's interesting here is that middle panel. If you see in the crevices of the brain, there's actually functional connectivity coming from the prefrontal cortex. Those regions of the brain that are highlighted in red in the front, and the foremost part of the brain. And this was a surprise to me because I didn't expect the prefrontal cortex to be all that involved with exercise. I expected it to be involved if you were thinking about doing mental math, or if you were resisting a temptation, or if you were doing planning out what you're going to be doing for the day. Those sorts of tasks tend to be prefrontal cortex. But it turns out exercise also recruits that part of the brain. And even more interesting, the more difficult the exercise, the more of the prefrontal cortex is involved. And what this means is this part of the brain that's key to overcoming a variety of mental illnesses, and is often less active in mental illnesses, is activated by muscular exercise. And here's other evidence. This is from school-age children. Turns out that for kids that have more aerobic capacity, they also have better mathematical achievement. And so this shows that the dumb jock is definitely a thing that exists. If you could see some of those aerobic capacity dots, those outliers on the far right in the middle, that is high aerobic capacity, middle of the road mathematical achievement. But really, it shows that the better your body is working, the better your brain is working. And this also, here's an older study showing the connection between the increased activity when you're doing certain kinds of cognitive tasks, increased activity in the rational thought part of the brain, and decreased activity in the part of the brain that processes conflict. What's interesting about this is that this suggests that it's a more efficient way of processing conflicting information, especially emotional information. And so the graph on the right is a picture of error-related negativity. It's an EEG signal, also showing that when you have more aerobic exercise, it is less cognitively demanding to process some of this cognitive information. And if you do that over a long time, you can actually see over the course of this experiment, people who were assigned to do exercise. They called it Nordic walking, which I had to look up. I didn't know what Nordic walking was. Apparently, it's a special kind of walking, but it's like with hiking poles, and if you use hiking poles, it gives you a better, more whole body experience. But in any case, versus gymnastics. But the point is, anybody who exercised more correlated with growth in that part of the brain. Now, the other thing is like, what do you mean growth? I mean, like, actual more gray matter was there at the end of the experiment than at the beginning. And the interesting thing was it worked in the other direction too. People who exercised less tended to have less gray matter in that particular region, the anterior cingulate cortex, which is, as you may or may not know, is very involved. That particular structure is involved in emotional processing in addition to helping with exercise. So. And if that's not enough evidence, if you exercise and have good aerobic capacity, it makes you live longer, or at least it's correlated with you living longer. This is a giant study of a whole bunch of people, and exercising is one of the most remarkable ways of living longer. So you're, I actually got this backwards in the slide, but if you are a low exerciser, then you are 5 times more likely to die than if you are an elite in the 97th percentile of exercise in the follow-up. So that's enormous. If you're a smoker, that only increases your chances of dying by 1.4 times. So it's pretty significant in the difference. Okay. And even if you just improve by 25 percentiles, that's about as good as quitting smoking. So if you're at the middle of the pack and you go to the 3/4 up to the 3/4 mark, that's a substantial improvement in the chance you're going to be alive in the next round. Okay, so next life hack is sometimes get off your butt. Now, again, this is with all these life hacks, they're all kind of tongue in cheek. And some people watching are in extreme circumstances, have perhaps major depressive disorder, or are experiencing limitations in their ability to move around. And so what I want to say is, with all of these things, do the best you can. One of my patients was just really dedicated. She had a variety of physical limitations and wasn't able to fully do some of these exercises that were generally recommended, but she got a little under-desk pedaling machine, and she did that for over an hour a day. At least 1 hour every day she would do this, and she lost over 50 pounds and is feeling great and was able to get exercise in despite having a variety of physical and mental challenges. So a lot of this is trying to find something that you can do. And that's actually also something people ask me is, well, what's the best kind of exercise? And best kind of exercise is the kind of exercise you'll do. So whatever you like to do, do that. Now, in the midst of a global pandemic, a lot of the things we like to do, we can't do. And so trying to find replacements or substitutes is important. And so whether it's calisthenics or push-ups and sit-ups in your room, or whether it's walking or running or cycling or whatever it is you can do make sure that you try to do something to get your heart moving and your muscles firing. So next, we're going to move on to the soul, or the psyche. Now, my profession is psychiatrist, and that comes from 2 Greek roots. One is psyche, which is soul, and the other is iatros, which is doctor. So I get to be a soul doctor, which is a really cool / somewhat grandiose title for what I'm doing on a day-to-day basis. And so I'm going to be talking for the rest of this episode and also next week about these kinds of things that humans are that are specific to humans. So higher level cognition, goodness, beauty, truth, some of these deeper concepts. Now, we're going to start with the true. Now, for a lot of people, this is who are experiencing major depression. Oftentimes, they'll have thoughts like, I'm worthless. I'm a burden. I'm alone. Things are hopeless. I have no choice. I cannot change. And these thoughts feel entirely true, even in their extreme versions. And I think for a lot of people, there's a lot of negative thoughts that are coming up with with COVID-19. I'm never going to get a job again. Things are going to go terribly because of this. I can't stand being in this house anymore. And these things seem like they may seem that it cannot be responded to, that this is just the reality of the matter. And I want to kind of talk about what choice, if any, do we have in these thoughts and having these thoughts. So here's a model about how thoughts arise. So according to one story, you have genetics and you have sort of inborn factors, say your genetics, and you have your upbringing, your childhood upbringing, things that happen to you when you're younger, things that happen to you as an adult. Those things all affect your brain, how your brain is wired. The brain wiring leads to thoughts, and in this case, we're talking about negative thoughts. And those negative thoughts lead to moods like sadness or depression. And so the challenge of this is, where exactly in this stream is there any hope of change? And so I'm going to take a quick aside, sidestep that question and come back to it. So for a long time, it was thought that you have no ability to grow brand new neurons, that your brain was pretty well settled by the time you were an adult. Whereas with your face turns over about once every month. You have a brand new face once a month, which is pretty cool. If you haven't seen somebody after the quarantine and you see them again face to face, those were brand new cells. You've never seen those cells before. Skeletons takes close to a decade, something like 7 years for a full skeletal turnover. But neurons, at least the story went for a long time, you didn't get any new neurons. There are some exceptions to that, but that remains largely true, that for most of the brain, new neurons, neurogenesis, is not something that happens as a full-grown adult. Okay, but there was a group in the late 20th century. We started to do experiments on monkeys with regard to the motor cortex. So this is a map on the left of the motor cortex, and you could see the different parts of the motor cortex correspond to different parts on the body. And so the hand is really big because there's a lot of neurons that are dedicated to processing movements in the hand. And so what they did was they observed changes in the motor cortex as they taught monkeys to have increased motor cortex of their fingers. And it turned out that as they did this, the motor cortex literally physically grew. The amount of actual cortex that was dedicated to that movement increased, which is astonishing. This idea that everything was fixed when you were an adult was revolutionized by these findings. And so it seemed, though, that there was a magic ingredient. It couldn't just be the movement of the fingers. It had to be that the monkeys were paying attention. It was almost as if the attention of the monkeys was the thing that reshaped and rewired that particular part of the brain. Now, you might say, how do they know the monkeys were paying attention? And the answer is by giving them like treats. The monkeys that were willing to work for certain things, they knew they were paying attention versus passively, for example, stimulating the fingers or things like that. But if the monkeys were not paying attention, there was no change in the brain. And so it seems like attention is a key ingredient to these changes. Okay, now I want everybody, wherever you are around the world, to raise your right hand and go like this. All right, that was just using your abductor digiti minimi, this little muscle right there at the side of your hand that has one job and only one job in life, and that is to do this. It's a really important job if you think about it. If you want to have a big, open your hand wide, you need a little muscle there, and that's what it does. Okay, so most people don't go to the gym to exercise their abductor digiti minimi. But if you did, in this particular experiment, you get 50% stronger. So they had the participants exercise 15 minutes a day for 12 weeks. Now, here's the mind blower. They had another group of participants think about exercising their abductor digiti minimi 15 minutes a day for 12 weeks. And they got 30% stronger. So you're getting physical changes. You're getting actual changes in physical strength by not moving that muscle, but just thinking about it. Now, this is astonishing. Probably there weren't any changes in the actual muscles themselves, but the ability for the brain to drive that particular muscle. But this is one of the most extreme examples of thoughts changing your brain, attention changing your brain. It's almost as if you have a lump of clay that is your brain, and that your attention allows you to mold it and shape it into whatever you want. And the question is, how do you do that? How do you use your attention in ways that are in line with the truth, in line with ways to best live? Okay, here's an example. You are paying attention, and your attention is suddenly drawn to anxiety. That's my best artistic rendition of what anxiety is. So if anybody wants a print of Dr. Carreon's rendition of anxiety, please direct message me or say so in the comments. So you could look at the anxiety, your attention gets pulled to the anxiety, but say it's also sunset. You have a choice. You have a choice to let your attention rest on the anxiety, as is the default mode, or you can redirect your attention to the sunset. Both things are true. It is simultaneously true that there is a sunset in this story and that you're feeling anxious. But you have the choice of pushing your attention in a direction that was not its default. And thus, if you did that, you change the actual wiring of the brain itself. So here's another example. Imagine you have the thought, I'm worthless. Perhaps it's because you had a great job and now you're laid off because of the virus. Or perhaps it's the case that you had another role that you can't fulfill now. You're separated from your family, or whatever it is. And so you might have the thought, I'm worthless. And if you pay attention to that thought, it grows up into a mood. It grows up into sadness or despair. But if you direct your attention to, I matter to some people, which is also simultaneously a thought that is accessible, that grows up into joy and relief. It turns out that you have a lot of things that you could pay attention to at once. So most of you right now are breathing as you're listening to me give this presentation. But you might also be working on your homework if you're younger, or you might be working on your work if you're older, or you might be wondering what happened to that text you sent to a loved one. Why didn't they respond back? Maybe I didn't like what they responded back with. All of these things are going on all at the same time. But how much attention do you have to put into breathing? Not much, because it's automatic. And there's a lot of things that are automatic. Another example is brushing your teeth. So most people, when they brush their teeth every morning, because you should do that. I'm not a dentist, but I hear that's a good idea. When you brush your teeth in the morning, you don't have to put much attention into it. You basically walk in, and because this habit has been done so many times, your hand just pretty much automatically gets the job done. That it just, your teeth get brushed, and you could think about what you're going to be doing in that day, or the weird dream you had last night, or whatever it is. You don't have to put any attention into it. And that's the beauty of habits. That habits, whether they be motor habits like brushing your teeth, or cognitive habits like paying attention to the sunset, these are things that allow you to do things more easily when you because you've practiced. Habits are tools for helping us get what we want. They are crystallizations of our repeated choices. We all have a first nature, or an instinct, and that is something like breathing. But what we can do with repeated practice, because of the way our brain is wired, and especially the way our brain allows us to rewire it, allows us to develop second nature. It's like an instinct, but it's something that we created. And so that's a critically important aspect of how we shape the clay that is our brain. Pay attention to create habits. All right, but what about emotional information? Emotional information can be incredibly jarring, pull our attention away. This is a classic experiment showing how this works. Now, this is also another one of these mind-blowing things. Normally, if you show somebody a face, and that has an emotional content to it. Humans are incredibly good at processing emotional faces, that our brains were very much optimized to figuring out what that emotion is and responding to it. And so when you look at this right now, And in this particular experiment, they were distracting people by feeding them emotional content while also allowing them to pick something that's unrelated. So in this case, that was a match. What do you think this person's name is? When you looked at the emotional content, it lit up a part of the brain called the amygdala. The amygdala is one of the fear centers of the brain. It processes high intense emotion and especially emotional content with the face. And so this is a very classical finding. Now, the twist in this particular experiment was, what happens if you just asked people, what emotion is this? Angry or scared? Now, of course, this is an angry face, and so people would pick angry. It's not a very difficult task. It doesn't take a lot of cognition. But the fascinating thing was, simply by picking the name of the emotion, the exact same stimulus, the exact same photons of this person's face are going into the eyeball and being processed by the visual cortex. The exact same stimulus, except you just have to label it, changed the activation of the amygdala. It reduced it. It calmed it down. In fact, the prefrontal cortex, the right inferior frontal cortex, this part of the brain started being more active. And that calmed the amygdala down. And this is a mind-blowing finding because in the old way of thinking, there's stimulus and response. It's always stimulus and response. And no matter what you do, you can't break that stimulus and response. And once you've responded, you could then maybe say, oh, well, then I'm not going to, I'm going to do something differently later. But this changed the whole game because now it's not just stimulus response. Now it's stimulus. And even before you respond, your brain is doing something. Am I going to process this emotion and trying to label it with an English word? Or am I going to just experience it? And that leads to two very different states of brain from the exact same stimulus. And so this gives us enormous power to think about how we respond to threats. Examine your feelings to affect them. So if you want to change your feelings, pay attention to them. Give a label to it. This is often very helpful in anxiety itself. Like, what's the name of this emotion that I'm feeling right now? And so that's a huge hint. Okay, now I want you to imagine a person. We'll call him James. James works in a cadaver lab. Cadavers are people who've donated their bodies after they've died for the learning of medical students. James is a vegetarian for moral reasons. He doesn't eat anything that because he doesn't want things to die so that he can be fed. However, he one day, when he's in the lab, decides that he's going to cut off a piece of one of the cadavers, take it home, cook it thoroughly, and eat it. What are your feelings about James? Now, if you're like most people, the response is, that's horrifying. You can't eat people. You have an intense emotional reaction to the possibility of cannibalism. Now, this is a study by a guy named Jonathan Haidt. And the great thing about the study is he had his one of the people involved with the research question people. All right, well, why can't you eat people? Well, and they would give various explanations. Well, maybe they get sick. And it's like, well, I said in the story that he thoroughly cooked it. What would that be? What's the problem with that? And even when people ran out of reasons why you can't eat a person, they would hold by their initial moral conviction. And what Haidt argued is that sometimes an emotion, in this case disgust, leads to a thought that is wrong. And that even and then you come up with reasons about why you think it's wrong as a secondary process. That is to say, the emotion comes first, and the thought to justify the emotion comes later. And so this is an extreme example of that. And so the lesson here is don't believe everything you think. So let's get back to our thoughts. I am worthless. I am a burden. I'm alone. Things are hopeless. I have no choice. I cannot change. Now, it might be that when you have a negative thought, it leads to a negative emotion. But it might be the other way around. It might be that you have these negative emotions which lead to these negative thoughts. And so it's this vicious cycle The thoughts lead to emotions, the emotions lead to thoughts. They lead to this unbreakable cycle, or so it feels. Let's go back to our story. This seems to be the unbroken law of what depression looks like. Bad genes, maybe, plus bad experiences, maybe, lead to a bad neural arrangement, leading to bad thoughts, leading to sadness that can't be broken, or so it feels. Now, this is one of my mentors, David Burns. David Burns says, you can learn to change the way you think about things, and you can also change your basic values and beliefs. And when you do, you will often experience profound and lasting changes in your mood, outlook, and productivity. So let's put this together. So again, no question, there are genetics, there's early childhood experiences and adult experiences that changes your brain. These are unquestioned mechanisms. That leads to negative thoughts, and negative thoughts lead to sadness. But what's not often talked about is that in addition to negative thoughts, there is a whole multitude of thoughts that are accessible to you in any given moment. You could think about what the weather is. You could think about your favorite color. You could think about what a blessing it is to have the people in your life right now. You could think about the possibilities of the future. So some of these thoughts, if you focus on them, would lead to joy or happiness. And so the challenge then is to direct your thoughts, to push your attention in these directions that are more positive, and I would argue true. Life hack, tell the truth and don't believe dumb things about yourself. Now, again, sometimes this is incredibly difficult. Sometimes these things that we're believing about ourselves just seem like absolute certainty, as true can be. And so this is by no means an easy thing to do. In fact, for people with major depression, and for people who are struggling, for example, with a crisis, whether it be a death of a loved one or the current coronavirus pandemic, or the job loss, or anything that's associated with it, the truth is incredibly difficult to find sometimes. Is it true that it's always going to be this bad? Is it true that I am worthless because I don't have a job? These are things that may feel incredibly true, but what is actually reality? And what are thoughts that you could direct yourself to that you really do believe right now that would help pull you out of the mood that you're in, if it happens to be a bad one? This is a sculpture of Hamlet, and Hamlet asks the question, to be or not to be. So, is existence good or bad? Is existence worth sustaining? And I think in the extreme case, this is the question of suicide, or this is the question of, should I keep on living in a world that is as bad as it is, or at least as bad as it is for me? And I think that ultimately, on the final analysis, that the question is the answer is to be. And I think that a analysis of the truth, really getting down into these thoughts that are driving this despair, whether it be despair at the world, despair at the current situation, despair at how things are going, or whether it be something that's more personal, that challenge these thoughts that are automatic, challenge these thoughts that are focused on the negative, and test them and see, is that really the case? Are things as hopeless as they seem? And use this amazing ability to pay attention, to redirect your mood and your life. If you change your mind, you will change your mood. All right. So, with that, we are going to review our outline again. So we just did me talking. Now we're going to move on to the midstream survey. So if you would, click on that survey. I'm going to give you about 2 minutes to click on that survey and fill it out. So right now, there is the link below. It's also on the screen right now. And follow up because we're going to be doing a few things with that. We're going to be showing you the results of that at the end of the live stream, as well as using that in ways to think about how we might, as Flourish Tech, make a difference. And so if you have any questions, now's a good time to also ask further questions. And then we're going to, don't fill this one out yet, but there's going to come an end of stream feedback survey later. And then we're going to do a results of the midstream survey and then preview of next week. So you've got about another 1 minute to fill out the midstream survey. As an incentive, we're going to be also doing a giveaway. So one reason to do this is because you're nice, but another reason to do this is that we're going to be doing a $200 value gift pack. Now, here's the deal. There's going to be 2 prizes, and you can enter this survey in 2 different ways. One is by filling out the survey. The other is by participating in social media stuff. So if you fill out the survey right now, that's one entry. If you fill out the completion survey, that's a different survey. We're going to be doing more surveys next week too, and then we're going to randomly select the winners at the end of next week's live stream. Now, in this gift box, we're going to have all sorts of cool stuff, from books about anxiety to a pen, to a journal, to a Fitbit, to an Amazon gift card, and let's not forget the need that we all have right now for toilet paper. So we are going to be donating toilet paper in this gift bag to help relieve some of your needs. So we are going to give you another few minutes or so. Here's some other details about the survey, the drawing. So if you get points in a variety of ways. So if you follow us on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter or LinkedIn, that is 1 entry each. Up to 8 total entries. If you like us, that gets you an entry. If you share, that gets you an entry. If you tag a friend, that gets you an entry. If you complete a survey, that gets you an entry. Also, we allow you to fill out and do these things individually. So if there's 2 of you watching this right now, then both of you get to enter separately. So without further ado, we will move on. So fill it out. If you haven't done it yet, make sure to do it. Again, there's the survey. There's links at the bottom. And we will move on to Q&A. So sadly, my wife will not be able to join us today. I'm going to be doing this part solo, and we will go from there. Okay, so again, I'm David Carreon. We're going to be doing a Q&A. I'm going to be answering your questions. Anonymous questions through the link below, non-anonymous questions through the chat window, and questions submitted when you signed up for the program to begin with will also be addressed. Make sure they're non-clinical questions. If you have a personal question, please ask your personal doctor. Be nice in the chat, and here we go. Okay, so the first question, I really like this question. What is neuroplasticity? Now, I talked a lot about neuroplasticity, but I didn't really define it all that well. Neuroplasticity or plasticity in general, is the ability for something like a paperclip. If you have a paperclip and you bend it, it has this phase of plasticity. Normally it's elastic. You bend it and it goes back. You bend it and it goes back. You bend it and it goes back. But if you bend it hard enough, it has this new shape. You're able to change its shape and it holds that shape. And so when we talk about neuroplasticity, it's like bending the paperclip of your brain. That when you do this thing repetitively, you're able to develop a new way of operating. At one point, you didn't know how to brush your teeth, and then you bent your brain in this particular way into toothbrushing, and now it comes naturally. So that is neuroplasticity. Let's see. The next question is there a minimal time of exercise for it to have impact? Okay, so this is a great question because you don't want to do exercise, or you want to do the minimum amount possible. The answer is, yeah, basically there's a huge difference between a little bit of exercise and no exercise. So and this is what I tell people, my patients who are depressed, even if we're talking about literally walking out your door, taking a lap around a 1-block walk for 5 minutes, that's dramatically different than zero exercise. Now, I've read a lot of papers and have not come to a conclusion about the optimum after that. Is it smooth? Is more better? How do you separate out causes from correlations? I don't have a clear answer, but yeah, I think the heart recommendations are probably the ones to go on. So, exercising for at least half an hour 3 times a week is a reasonable goal. Probably it's the case that if you're doing more intense exercise, it's probably better for you. But then again, there's that study on the elite aerobic performance being really good for your mortality. So, but I haven't seen any conclusive data on optimum for mental health. Okay. What about what kinds of spiritual exercises can you comment on? This is a spectacular question, and I think this the answer to this question is going to depend also on where you're coming from spiritually. So for a lot of people, the answer is prayer. So often for Christians, core spiritual exercises are things like prayer and fasting and reading spiritual texts or the Bible. And those are sort of categories of spiritual exercises that might be broadly applicable. So ways of developing different parts of yourself, trying to understand the philosophical questions. So perhaps that would be reading, if you're an atheist, perhaps that would be reading a philosophical text, or meditating, focusing on your breath. But also, oftentimes there are aspects of depriving yourself intentionally. So we are still, for at least another few hours in the Christian world, in a season of Lent, where it's common to give up some sort of food or pleasure for the sake of preparing your hearts for this season. So that might be something to consider too. Next question is, why does Dr. C say that anxiety is the default setting rather than goodness? Now, it's a great question. So I think that part of this comes, this phrasing for me is a clinical bias. So I see people when they're having problems. I think if you're in a good state, then the default state isn't anxiety, it's peace. And I think that oftentimes when people are successfully treated, the first thing they'll say is not, I feel unanxious, it's, I feel normal. I feel like myself. And that tells me that these are abnormal states that we've gotten ourselves into by whatever means, be it genetics or choices or circumstances. So I think that the default state, so in like cognitive behavioral therapy writings, you hear about automatic thoughts, and I think it's a good point to say, well, sometimes we have good automatic thoughts. All automatic thoughts aren't just badness and terror and such. So default settings, and this is default settings. This also maybe gets philosophical. Is what is the default setting for humans? Are humans basically good, or are humans basically bad? Or in what ways are we basically good and basically bad? So I think there's also a piece there. Can you talk about exercise and memory connections as we age? So yeah, so it turns out that a lot of the research on maintaining cognition, a lot of the studies, even one of the ones I showed you today, I didn't mention it, but happened to be done in older adults. So probably the bigger changes in it's probably easier to maintain memory than it is to go from good memory to great memory as a 30-year-old. So these effects are especially important if you're older. Are there any guided mental exercise programs, like guided meditation, but for exercise? Yeah. So there are guided exercise programs. In fact, they are proliferating. There are numerous people, and now with coaches and personal trainers who have gyms closed, are offering programs online for personal guidance in your home about how to exercise. There's also programs. One that I've used in the past is the 7-minute workout, where you just go through a circuit and you go through push-ups, sit-ups, chair dips, squats, and you do that intensely, and it's and there's a program for the physical. Now if the question is about mental exercises like brain training and games like that, that has been remarkably unsatisfying in its benefit. So brain games generally tend to make you good at brain games. And so if you had a choice between doing a brain game and going for a walk, I'd say go for a walk. That's probably going to be better for your cognition overall. Now, that said, I think that there's it's difficult to operationalize or to create an experiment about complex work. So I think that doing something cognitively demanding with your day is good. And I don't think that Sudoku or crossword puzzles cut it. So trying to find something that really engages your brain at its something near its full capacity is also important. We're going to talk more about that next week. How do you reduce anxiety about working out? Well, it's also a great question. And I think that trying to break a task into something that is like laughably easy is the most important thing. I had a friend who once told me that to start to motivate him and his workout routine, he would start by the exercise routine would involve him getting on his gym clothes and walking to the door, walking through the door, saying, "That was a great accomplishment," turning back around and finishing the walk, and that was his walk for the day, and then just gradually building that up. These sort of start with a comically easy task that you can complete. You want to set goals that you can crush, or at least that you have the possibility of crushing. If you say, I'm going to run a marathon in a week, it's like, nah, you're just going to disappoint yourself. That's unless you're well trained, that's a difficult thing to do. So start with something that you can regularly do every week, and then address it. And generally with anxiety, the answer is you kind of got to face it. There's not much of a way around something that's anxiety provoking. All right. How do I quiet my mind so I can sleep? Now, this is another really important question, and I'd say a lot of that goes to going back to last week's video. So review some of the tips there about how to have a good going to bed routine, but trying to do something, have some time of quiet before you go to sleep is very good. And so prayer or meditation or a reading that's going to be calming, those are things that are often helpful in preparing to fall asleep. The other thing is, if you're not sleepy, if you're not going to fall asleep right away, don't worry about it. Go do something else. Don't, if your mind is racing and you're thinking about a million other things, go and do those things if you're not going to fall asleep. Like I said, if it's not like 20 minutes, if you're in bed and you're not asleep in 20 minutes, get up and do something else. Okay. What about how does exercise affect brain chemistry? What kind is best? And does too much exercise change the stress hormones? Yes. So This is actually also a really interesting question, and a really good question, because there might be, so there is a question about, is there too much exercise? Now, definitely in some extreme states. So for example, if you are, so in some cases, anorexia, over-exercise is a major problem. But for a large majority of Americans, that is not the problem. So you can pretty well drive yourself, with gradual steps to a lot of exercise. In terms of the neurochemistry, there's not a ton of. I guess I'm much less interested in the changes in the neurochemistry as I am in the changes in neural connections. There is some evidence that a chemical called BDNF, which is important for neuroplasticity, increases, but that's not a lot. But in terms of the stress hormones, this is also something interesting. If the book is Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers, by, I think that was Sapolsky, a great review on the stress physiology system. And one of the main ideas of the book is that high stress, like releasing a ton of stress hormones in discrete periods and short time, is really good for you. That it's actually not good for you to avoid stress entirely. But the thing that's hard for us is chronic stress, having those stress hormones always elevated. So doing an intensive workout once a day or once, a few times a week, that is good for you overall, and releases chemicals like cortisol. All right, next question. So what are practical ways we can actually change our thinking? I hear that we can do that, but what is the actual thing we can implement after this to help us not become overwhelmed by depressive thoughts? Okay, so this is a good question and a hard question. So practically, there are small things and there's big things. So big things are things like going to therapy. Finding a psychotherapist, a cognitive behavioral therapist, for example, works very well with the framework that I've talked about. But any therapist really will help you identify which of your thoughts are helpful or true and which of your thoughts are not, and help you navigate towards something real. And so if it's difficult to know, then professional help might be warranted. Talking to somebody else can also be helpful. I'm having these negative thoughts about myself. Are they true? A loved one or a trusted friend can help with that. But also writing down what are the thoughts and trying to make an argument against them is also something. So one practical thing is right after this, if you have some depressing thoughts, write them down on a piece of paper and see if you can come up with responses to them. Again, if this is challenging, then it might be a time to consider getting help. There's also a self-help. So there are self-help books. The one that's most evidence-based is Feeling Good by David Burns. I believe we have that in the resources email from the first week. There's also You Are Not Your Brain by Jeff Schwartz, where some of the ideas from this talk came from. And both of those books on the depression side would be very good. And then When Panic Attacks is a great one for anxiety. So those are very reliable guides to helping you move forward. How do we tell the difference between depressive thoughts and actual concerns? I feel like oftentimes I'm just so convinced that my depressive thoughts are true that my positive thoughts were actually me being deceived. This is absolutely one of the challenges of the human condition. What is truth? What is actually going on? I think that this is why this is so hard. What is true about me and what is true about the world? And this is things that can partly be done solo, partly be done in privacy. But as we think, as we read, as we talk and converse with people, trying to figure out, is that thing I tell myself true? So another question earlier was, what are examples of don't tell yourself dumb things. Don't believe dumb things about yourself. Well, what are dumb things? Well, things that are false, that I am totally worthless. Now, sometimes we feel that way, but that's false. You're not totally worthless. You've got some value. You've got some utility to somebody. And one more question. We have, I've heard some big developments this week about someone calling TMS that might be something that might be able to cure depression. Can I talk briefly about that? Yeah, okay, so there was a spectacular paper published this week by my friends and colleagues at Stanford's brain stimulation lab. So Nolan William and Brandon Bensley and Ellie Cole and a bunch of others have worked on this amazing paper. The short of it was that if you apply this particular kind of TMS, like a high-dose TMS, to people who are in severe depression, people who have tried everything. Some of them have tried ECT, have tried tons of medications, and nothing was working. They've been depressed sometimes for years and years. You give them 1 week of this intensive TMS, and 90% of them are better. We have not broken the 50-60% line for an open label treatment of depression ever. Like this is unprecedented. So this is one of the most exciting discoveries in psychiatry, I think, maybe ever. And so this is a super exciting opportunity. Now, the other exciting thing is that we do a very similar protocol at Acacia and are seeing very similar results. So this is an exciting time in psychiatry. What is TMS? TMS is a transcranial magnetic stimulation. It's a way of stimulating the brain without medication. So you come into an office like ours once a day, usually. Typically it's for 2 months, but the Williams team was able to do it in 1 week. And so that's an exciting new opportunity available. All right, so that is time. We're out of time for questions. So now we're going to have you, if you could, fill out the post-feedback survey. So that's also in the link below. And if you could do that right now, and I'm going to show you the results of your questions. All right, so which problem do you feel most strongly about? So this is the question we asked you in the survey, and we're doing this Family Feud style. Friends and family do not often know how to help their depressed loved ones. That was 22% of audience respondents answered that. Depressed people do not always have the energy or willpower to seek help, 16%. And depressed people lack community or do not feel like they belong, 14%. So thank you for answering that survey. Please fill out the post survey. The next one is going to be Saturday, 4/18 at 2 p.m. And next week we're talking about the meaning of life. So that should take us about an hour. Hope to see you there. Remember that we have a giveaway. If you haven't done the mid-survey, feel free to do that now. It's not too late to get one entry, and if you do the follow-up survey, that will also get you another survey, another entry into the drawing. And of course, social media. Like, share, subscribe, tag friends, follow us, do all of those things that are hip and cool these days. And here are our social media handles. So Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, TikTok. That's how you say it, right? TikTok, LinkedIn, and then also both Acacia and Flourish Tech. So it was great having you online, and look forward to seeing you all or next week.